spelled. It's actually pronounced Worms, but it's spelled with a W. Anyone who knows anything about German knows why.
Yeah.
Concordant of Worms. Not Worms, folk. The Concordant of Worms. It was an agreement whereby it was decreed that the church would appoint the officials, but the lords could approve or disapprove of them. Now, if the church appointed someone and the Lord didn't approve, the church had to appoint someone else. But there was a step in a good direction. And again, one of the things that might have put Europe ahead was Europe had a separation of church and state. Western Europe, something you don't find in other religions. Not as much as you do here. Eventually what this led to is separation of church from state. Now, the most powerful pope who ever lived was Pope Innocent III. Innocent III was a little man, and inside of Rome itself and the surrounding area around Rome, he got almost no respect. And yet, though, in the rest of Europe, he told even the most powerful kings what they could and could not do. Now, I'm not saying in any way that this was right. But again, where this was to eventually lead was where Europe set up for church and state became separate. But at this point, the church was on top. Innocent III, all right, Philip Augustus decided he didn't like his wife. Now, keep in mind, Philip Augustus was one of the most powerful monarchs in Europe. So Philip divorced his wife. Pope Innocent III said to Philip, you must take back your wife. God does not sanction divorce. The church does not sanction divorce. I do not approve of your divorce. Philip took back his wife. King John, again one of the more powerful kings, whatever else may have been wrong with him. King John of England said, my father chose the Archbishop of Canterbury, so I'm going to choose the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, the Archbishop of Canterbury is the highest church office in England, still is. The Pope said, no, I will choose the Archbishop of Canterbury. Innocent won that fight also. King John had to acquiesce. Over and over. Now, he was the one who set up the Inquisition. But the Inquisition was set by him. But now he also did something else. And folk, I'll tell you before I start, I can never talk about indulgences without blushing. So if you see me blushing in a minute, you'll know why. Sale of indulgences. Originally, the sale of indulgences was where you paid money to get a loved one out of purgatory. But what they became was, if you decided you wanted to commit a certain sin, you would go to the priest and tell the priest what sin you wanted to commit. Then you and the priest would haggle over the price. The richer you were, the more money you were expected to pay, or the bigger the sin you wanted to commit, the more you'd pay. After a while, you agree on a price. Then the priest would write you out a bill of forgiveness, knowing that you were going to go out and at least try to commit the sin you had just purchased forgiveness for. Now, no, I must state the Catholic Church does not sell indulgences anymore. Now, the Catholic Church still will grant forgiveness, but it's not done for money. Now, the sale of indulgences, folk, was really, really a big thing. I mean, St. Peter's in Rome, which still stands, and is still used to where they meet, the cardinals meet and pick the Pope. It's where the Pope lives. St. Peter's was built from the money from the sale of indulgences. But, now I want to see, I know it's hard for me to keep you awake, but how many of you know who I'm talking about? The sale of indulgences one day bumped head on into a certain individual, and this individual got them stopped. Who? Do you know who I'm talking about? Anyone of you who studied history? Who's got the sale of indulgences stopped? You'll talk about it in second semester world history. Maybe some of you never heard, you should have heard of him by now. His name was Martin Luther. Martin Luther spoke hard against it, and by the time he spoke, if you think there's something wrong with the theology behind the sale of indulgences, those people did too. And the church did not want them stopped because they were getting a lot of revenue from it, but Martin Luther said the sale of indulgences is wrong, and eventually the church had to acquiesce, basically had to agree. Step down. But the sale of indulgences was started by Pope Innocent III. Under him, too, a lot of persons were killed by the Inquisition. Again, now, universities got started. The first university to start was in Bologna, Italy. And again, a lot of persons credit the universities with being what led Europe to excelling. Colleges have at times, and people blame the church for standing in the way of progress, but at times universities have. In 1903, a college professor wrote that mankind will never fly, and he proved it mathematically. The problem with mathematic proof, it didn't include every figure it should have. There were some figures he should have put in his equations he didn't put in. About the time he did that, two young men from Ohio named Wilbur and Orville Wright flew a heavier-than-air airplane and made him look like a dunce. There have been other instances. For instance, college professors used to say that you cannot drill for oil. Oil doesn't exist underground. They proved to be wrong also. And personally, I think that right here in the year 2018, some high up people are about to be made dunces of. All right, in what way? On Thanksgiving Day, folk, some people published a paper, which our president read, telling us that global warming was going to become a terrible disaster. I mean, it's going to raise the level of the oceans by a few hundred feet, and Florida's going to go underwater, and we're all going to burn up. That same day, a record for coldness for Thanksgiving Day was set. This last Thanksgiving was the coldest Thanksgiving on record, and I want to tell you something, those of you who might not know it. The temperatures we're having right here, right now, are way below normal for late November, more like January. Our weatherman here, Kirk Miller, says so. All right, I'm going to have more to say about that, hopefully before the period ends. All right, okay, I'm going to ask you this classic question. All right. When does any matter of scientific inquiry become so proven that you never ever question anymore? This matter is proven beyond any doubt, and it's never questioned. When does this happen in scientific circles? Now, you all should know that. There's one word to do for an answer. When does this happen? Huh? Thank you. Go to the head of the class. Never. Every matter of scientific inquiry is always open to further discussion. I mean, okay, granted, isn't it true that for every action there's an equal opposite reaction, as Newton said, but we need to prove it every year, because every year we have better techniques to prove it and better equipment, more precise equipment. We need to prove it. And also in quantum physics, what we know about, in physics above the quantum level does not work. You might need to know, hear this. The quanta, that's subatomic particles, behave one way when they're being observed, and then they behave another way when they're not being observed. Have you heard this yourself, I guess? Yeah. A few others of you might have heard that. Oh, yes. And quantum physics does not work like Newtonian and Einsteinian physics at all. A particle can go from here to here without ever having been anywhere in between. I gotta stop. Some of you might have heard that. All right, now that's quantum for you. Now, beam of light, you shine this way, you turn it red, will also turn red the same beam will shine this way at the same place. Very classic experiment. All right. Now, universities. First one began in Bologna. Then they started one in Paris. And by the way, the University of Bologna still exists. The University of Paris exists. The University of Oxford still exists. Universities were where like one man would get together and collect some students, and he and his students would wear gowns. As recently as about 100 years ago in America and Europe, college teachers would still wear gowns when they taught a class. You can imagine me standing up here with a gown on, a big robe. And its contrast, a lot of today's college teachers come dressed in ragged blue jeans and tennis shoes. I think, folks, if you know if Professor does, I think it's wrong. I really do. I mean, in my day, when I was young, the teachers had to wear a suit and tie. Then the dress got less and less, worse and worse as time went on. But anyway, but they called them gownsmen. Fights between town and gown are often. They only had 3 degrees: the bachelor's, master's, and doctorate. Bachelor's degree was your entry into the field. You were just knowledgeable field. Master's meant you could teach. Doctorate meant you were top in the field. 3. Now today, I mean, we have this associate degree, and we have some places a specialist degree. But 3 degrees now, which brings me up to the scholasticism. Scholastics. The scholastics were very much into studying Aristotle, even though obviously Aristotle was not Christian because he lived 300 years before Christ, and he was not even a Jew. But anyway, Aristotle was a favorite topic of them. And in some ways this was good, and in some ways it was bad because Aristotle was wrong in some things. But they did not use the scientific method as of yet. Now there's a story that went around about a group of people who were discussing the issue of how many teeth does a horse have. Well, they paged Plato, and he didn't tell them. They paged Aristotle, he didn't tell them. But some young man who didn't know better, I mean, he was quite young, he said, "Hey, there's a horse out there. Why don't you go out and open his mouth and count his teeth?" The others called, "Where are you from?" They kicked him out of the room. You know, he was just too ignorant to be. Then they kept paging one scholar after another, and finally said, "This problem is unsolvable. We'll never know." I mean, because nobody has ever told us how many teeth a horse has, so this problem is unsolvable. And anyway, they used the books to try to solve their issues. In the case of Aristotle, again, he was looked on as being really high up. Scholasticism mainly dealt with the issue of faith versus reason. And folk, this is still going on. Faith and reason. In this morning's class, we had a little bit of a discussion on evolution. I will say this: evolution was a proven fact in 1960. We're told we had to accept it. Today, there are issues with it that even some evolutionists will privately admit that things about it that just simply does not add up and cannot be explained. Anyway, the scholastics dealt with this issue, and again, I think that one of the reasons of the conflict between faith and reason is sometimes science is wrong, and sometimes reason is proven to be wrong, and sometimes in the matter of faith, it's subject to interpretation. Our interpretation is wrong. I mean, we're all human. All right, now, into this scenario came St. Thomas Aquinas. Among Catholic theologians and their Catholic scientists, he's looked on as being the champion of reason. He did something that others have tried since. He tried to explain every phenomena in the universe and put all the universe into one big field. Einstein called it the unified field theory, or that we'd someday explain everything. Some people have called it the TOE, T-O-E, or theory of everything. The idea that we're going to explain it. In 1950, folk, 1 year after I was born, the scientists of that day believed we've just about, out of the few things we don't know yet, we just about explained it all. Today, a lot of science are ready to admit that there's some things we just simply are not going to explain. On a practical level, there's two types: there's practical and theoretical. On a practical level, we have better computers than we did a generation ago. We have better cars than we did a generation. Believe me, our cars today are much better. We have better lighting, better climate control in our classrooms than we did. That's practical science. On a theoretical science, every theory we have about why the universe works the way it does, every theory has some compelling reason why it can't be right. What about gravity? Gravity works pretty well inside our solar system, the theory of gravity, but get outside and so we're going to find out, hey, how can this galaxy hold together with such few bodies? There's not enough gravity, yet it's holding together. How come? We don't know. How can you explain why some of those distant stars are going away from us at 25,000 miles a second? I'll give you a hint. I don't know. That's our observation. It's just, and again, there's some things we're just not going to be able to explain. But Thomas Aquinas believed he could explain everything. The Latin language began to be replaced by the vernacular, even though now I have a pupil in my class this morning who said that if you want to be a doctor, that even today, you have to learn Latin. I don't know how true that is, but at one time, doctors would write out the prescription. Doctors and pharmacists would write each other in Latin because there were some things that were considered either too vulgar or too personal to be written in plain English. So doctors would write out to each other in Latin so that the ordinary person could understand what was being written, so on and so forth. And I heard also that lawyers still sometimes write to each other in Latin so that the ordinary person won't understand what's being written. But Latin began to be replaced by the vernacular. The types of cathedrals. There were the Romanesque and the Gothic, two types. And I want to compare this. For some of you will be seeing this on the final. Now, by the way, the word Gothic has nothing to do with the Goths, but the Romanesque, Gothic, Romanesque cathedrals, they had the barrel roofs. What's a barrel roof? It's a rounded roof like a wigwam type. Barrel roofs, they were dark inside. They were generally very, very sturdy. The Gothic cathedrals were not as sturdy. They had the ribbed vault. Everything about Gothic cathedrals suggested skywardness, heaven. They had the pointed, not the arch. It's not the arch at all. They also had trying to draw some ribbed vaults. In other words, ribs, ribbed vaults. But they also had a lot of stained glass windows. Which made them very light inside. Very light inside. Okay. Now, something else. Now about these people. Now we had a little discussion about this in this morning's class. Alchemy. I'm going to write this over here because I really don't want it to be seen so much. In view of what I'm about to say about alchemy. Alchemy is the idea that you can transmute baser metals into gold. Now, I just learned this morning that this had been done recently. That some scientists got together. It took $5,000 worth of equipment to get about $40 worth of gold. Now, I know your chemistry teacher will tell you it can't be done, or likely your physics teachers will tell you also it can't be done. During the Middle Ages, they believed not only it could be done, they claimed to have done it. And in one case, alchemy was transmuted to gold in front of a pope who was surrounded by some cardinals and some of the most educated men in Europe. In Austria, I've heard there's a piece of lead that is lead on one side and gold on the other. That's where the alchemist did not finish his job. The metal they used mostly was lead mixed with salt and mercury and a whole lot of heat. I'll tell you, I'm tempted to say if you want to hear the rest of what I'm thinking, you might just go to this morning's lecture. I mean, sometimes I'm really shaking my shoes to tell you what I really think. I think that it involved a little bit of a supernatural element there, that you got to a certain point in the process and some spiritual entity came in and did the actual transmuting for you. Now, that's as much as I want to say about it. Everyone who has looked into it has had to put it down after a while because it involves. Well, I'll put it to you this way, folk. I strongly would recommend that you not try this at home or anywhere else or ever try it. Again, because a lot of the persons who have tried it have wound up either committing suicide or something else. But Sir Isaac Newton got to looking at some old papers. Now, all right, in the case of Newton, I want to tell you, he was working 20 hours a day to finish his book, Principia, 20 hours a day. He was about to go before a judge who had won some 250 million at one time, and to call Newton in to go before this judge. His mother had died, whom he was close to, so, I mean, that's enough to make a man have a nervous breakdown. But Sir Isaac Newton went crazy in the middle of his life. It's sometimes maybe called a midlife crisis. He slammed everybody and slandered everybody around him. Then when he came to his senses, he felt, I'm going to say, he felt remorse. He wrote letters of apology to everybody he had slandered and explained, I'm sorry about what I said to you. I really was very sick and I did not mean it, and I hope you'll accept my apology. Every one of them did. But he never looked at those papers again. The papers were only given to extremely intelligent people, and they were very, very, very old, ancient papers that only a few privileged people ever have the privilege to see. I'll leave it at that. Every biography you read of Newton will talk about his midlife crisis, and they blame him on the fact he was facing this judge. And by the way, Newton came out on top with that judge. That judge was dismissed, and the King of England had to flee, King James II. But nobody liked it that the king had taken on Isaac Newton. So even the king could not stand up to Newton in the long run. All right, folk, for this, we go to chapter 13, the Byzantine Empire and the Crusades. The Byzantine Empire was what was left of the Roman Empire when the Roman Empire fell. It was started by Constantine in 312, the early 300s. It ended in 1453 when the Muslims captured this capital, Constantinople. But the Byzantine Empire, while Western Europe was heading into a dark age, the Byzantine Empire was thriving. Now, eventually, the Byzantine Empire never did accept the authority of the Pope. The Pope insisted, I'm in charge of all the church. The Byzantine Empire said, no, you're not. To this day, if you could attend a meeting of the top 5 Byzantine patriarchs, you notice it 5, they'll sit down 5 chairs. One chair is for the Patriarch of Constantinople. The other chair is for the Patriarch of Jerusalem, where Christianity, sorry, the other chair is for the Patriarch of Antioch, where Christianity was first called Christians. The other one is for the chairs for the Patriarch of Alexandria. Now, the 5th chair is for the Pope of Rome. But the 5th chair has been empty for more than 1,000 years. If you'll come in and sit down like you're just one of us, you're welcome to join. The Pope says, no, if I come, it's understood I'm the head. So the other 4 sit down and discuss things. The Pope is left out. To his own choice, by the way. Anyway, the Byzantine Church, or the Eastern Orthodox Catholic Church, broke away in the year 1054, and it became the Eastern Orthodox. The Eastern Orthodox Catholic Church. Now, there's a few differences. Now, if you talk to some, they'll name many differences because over the last 1,000 years, I mean, there have been a lot of differences that's come up. But one of them is the Eastern Orthodox Church does not recognize the authority of the Pope. To them, he's just another bishop and is not the head of the whole church. The Eastern Orthodox allow their clergy to marry if the clergy tells them when he first joins, the clergy that I'm going to be a married clergy. But if he says I'm going to be celibate, he's expected to stay celibate. But a clergyman can decide at the beginning whether he's going to be married or celibate. A few other differences that have actually, they'll say there are many differences that have crept in along the way. Now, Byzantine Empire started off after the fall of the Western with a ruler, well, early in their history had a ruler named Justinian. Justinian conquered almost all the Mediterranean, and it looked like the Roman Empire was about revived. This was after the Western Roman Empire had been destroyed. Justinian came around the year 500. Now, if you look on your charts, you might notice the Western Roman Empire fell in 476. Justinian came just a few years after that. He actually claimed that he was emperor of Rome also. He operated in Constantinople, but he overextended himself, and with 3 years after he died, what he built up was gone, bankrupt. Yes, even governments go bankrupt. Early in its history, the Byzantine Empire lost Africa, lost its Syria, and lost Palestine. Basically lost Africa and the Middle East. Now, I recently read, just this year, what wars hold the record for being the longest wars in history? The answer is wars between the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire lasted something like more than 500 years. Eventually, after 500 years of fighting, the Byzantines really got tough on the Persians, and they went in and in 3 campaigns greatly crushed the Persian Empire. And in the meantime, though, they weakened both the Persian and Byzantine Empire, to where Islam would come out and overspread and conquer Persia, and eventually conquer the Byzantine Empire. But it took them a long time to get all the Byzantine Empire. Their capital was at Constantinople. All right. Now, the Crusades. The Crusades are an issue with some folk. A lot of people say that they were a big waste of resources, a big waste of money. To me, there never was a series of wars in history that was more justified or justifiable. Why do I say that? Because the Christian Europe was fighting against people who had vowed to overcome them, conquer them, and basically rule over all of Christianity. I read a history book one time that asked the question, supposing that Islam had won, would it have been so bad? This man was very pro-Arab. And in this morning's class, I have about 3 pupils